Hey folks out there, this is Ted with the Business of Cyber series. It is Tuesday, it is 10 a.m., and I'm really excited to talk to you today about a topic that I've always been really curious about, and that is cyber insurance within the critical sectors. Now, if it's the first time that you're joining the Business of Cyber show, the entirety of this program and everybody that we bring onto this program, and why I wake up every morning and think about this next topic that we're going to do, or any of the topics, is because I think that security leaders, specifically in the critical sectors, are really low on resources. They don't have enough time, they don't have enough budget, and they just don't have enough people to execute on their product, their security, their compliance, and their maturity roadmap. They're just overwhelmed. And so the entire concept behind Business of Cyber series is how do we get more information to the business leaders about the people, the process, and the technology that they need to do their job better. And today, I'm going to be joined by a special guest named Monica Tigleanu, joining us from Bermuda, who is an expert in the cyber risk management and cyber insurance space. Monica, welcome to the show. Thank you for the investment of time.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, no, so we got linked up, I think right after S4 by Danielle Jablonski, which was an awesome introduction. She says, Ted, you have to have Monica on the show. I think she said the same to you. So really excited to dive into cyber insurance and hopefully take some questions from our audience today. But to help us get started, I just wanted to showcase, this is episode 33. We took a couple weeks off over the last couple weeks just because we wanted to make sure that we had really great content laid out. And we haven't talked about cyber insurance in over a year. So to help us kind of drive that, the agenda that we're looking at today, I want to introduce Monica. Monica, we want to tell us about what you do, where you're from, how you found yourself in this role. But I think it's important for the audience to get a primer from an expert on cyber insurance. What are the components of it? How does it work? How do these programs, how do these policies evolve? And then we'll get a little bit deeper with a couple slides to help us navigate on what are the challenges that we face as a critical sector industry. And as we go through this, if you have questions or if you have comments, don't hesitate to go ahead and share those within the chat or within the actual LinkedIn program, because we can see it on our end. So Monica, without further ado, tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to the team here.
Yes, so I'm primarily an insurance nerd, but I started off in underwriting. Actually, now I'm part of a broking group called BMS. I started my journey about 13 years ago with a company in Canada, and then I slowly moved into the London insurance marketplace, which if anybody on this call has ever been to London, it's notoriously known for its insurance and finance industry.
It's like the place where insurance is at. Isn't it probably the first place that actually offered insurance like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago?
Yeah, I mean, insurance can go all the way back to the Greeks and the Egyptians doing trade. So it's a concept that goes a long way back. But Lloyd's of London is an institution in the insurance space because it deals with novel or emerging risks in general. And so cyber risk was developed out or evolved in the Lloyd's of London marketplace. So it was crucial for me to understand how this risk was being underwritten or looked at in London. And then more recently, I came over to Bermuda to take a look at the reinsurance side of cyber risk, which is all interconnected. What risk a policyholder has is transferred to an insurance company, but then further down the line, it's transferred to the reinsurance companies. And we'll get into that. But my experience has been diverse. So not only have I spent time in underwriting, but also broking with some of the large broking houses in this space, such as Marsh. I've looked at the underwriting philosophies of different companies. So that has given me an appreciation for how many opinions or ways of doing things there are. And that will build into our discussion today in terms of how you as an asset owner can think about your risk through the lens of an insurance company. And then I took the time, even though I don't have the possibility of working directly in this space, in the cyber risk management of an asset owner, let's say, I've taken an interest to get certified so I can understand the challenges and, of course, use the same concepts and language as everybody else in this space.
Well, I think that's overachievement at its best. I think that that makes a lot of people jealous who have tried to get that CISSP and haven't been able to. And so for you, I think it's awesome because it gives you a complex understanding. I would not say at a nascent level, but at a more in-depth level of what is the real challenges that a security leader faces, right? So I think that's really encouraging, and looking forward to the discussion today. As we dive in, the first kind of component of cyber insurance is the first title that we came up with. And I thought it was going to be really important to say, let's break down this entire concept of cyber insurance for the viewers, whether they're really mature in their journey or they're really early. What is cyber insurance, and how is it viewed and looked at in our market today?
Fair. I think it's easier if we think first of risk management before we even touch the topic of insurance. So knowing that risk management is at the core of what every security professional really is tasked to do, or the mission, right, is to manage this risk. And so you manage the risk because of the uncertainty that lies ahead, whether it's in respect of the threat or the outcome. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to cybersecurity and technology risk. Insurance is just a mechanism to finance a potential loss. Now, the financing of a potential loss can happen pre-loss, so before something bad happens, or after the loss. And insurance actually spans both pre-loss and post-loss. In a pre-loss scenario, you're utilizing the insurance policy to give you tools, maybe to supplement some of the cybersecurity controls that you might have on your roadmap. So it is a partner in terms of maturing the actual cybersecurity controls or posture of an organization. Through the due diligence process, the cyber insurer will give you an indication of what is best in class, or what are the standards in respect of cybersecurity controls for your particular sector, of course. And then from a post-loss perspective, insurance is there to offer a lifeline to give an injection of capital back into the company so that you can still have the same value for the company. So you're not losing money, you're not in financial distress, your shareholders are expecting a certain type of earnings. And so the insurance is there to cover those costs so that you're back up and running to the same level that you were prior to the loss happening.
Wow, that is a different way of explaining it. And I think you just froze up. So I have a question. Let's give her just a moment to see if she can bounce back in.
Yeah, I'm back.
You're back. You're back. So unbelievably different way of looking at it. I think people have always looked at cyber insurance historically as something we buy that we would call on that policy if we had non-productive time, if we had some sort of outage, if we had some sort of incident or but you're saying you can actually use in today's world an insurance program to actually fund your product or your resiliency roadmap?
And it's an indirect funding because it basically supplements your decision to put in place those controls. Or if you didn't think of certain controls that are needed to reduce your risk, an insurance company can provide you with those reasons because of the loss experience that they've seen in respect of those controls. So it gives you more ammunition.
So if I had, and I don't want to get too labored in the point, this is personally interesting to me, right? Because I look at insurance as a mechanism to overlay onto a controls posture that I may not be able to finance. So let's say that I have 7 controls from incident response all the way to encryption. And I've identified through some control gap assessments or maybe even some risk assessment that these are the biggest issues that I need to solve, but I may not have enough budget for them. I think the common thought process is, let me go solve this control, this control, this control, and then let me secure and get an adequate cyber insurance coverage in anticipation that should one of these controls be the avenue where a threat turns into a true risk, which turns into a true outage, that's the coverage. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying that you can actually use the coverage to implement those controls that you hadn't previously financed?
So it depends on how mature you are as an asset owner or organization, right? In very high levels of maturity, you would use the insurance just to protect you if those controls are not as effective as you once thought, right? And you still need that injection of capital to finance the loss post. But if you don't have a mature cybersecurity roadmap, if you don't really know what are your priorities, actually doing the due diligence through an insurance maturity assessment to know what controls you should have in place would give you the rationale to get the budget from your board of directors or your C-suite level. Or there are services built into the insurance policy that are at a discounted rate in terms of implementing some of those controls. So there are insurers out there that are able to help with the implementation of those controls. It is not 100% in the insurance market that everybody offers that, but there are some that do, and especially in the kind of SME mid-market space, that does happen.
It sounds like a really complex, not to discard our conversation, but as we keep it in the simplified manner, at least in the beginning of this podcast, it sounds like there's a positive correlation with the options that are out there for cyber insurance and your maturity. The more mature you are, the more a cyber insurance underwriter is going to be able to support you. Would you concur with that statement?
Yes, because you understand as an organization what is your tolerance for risk. So what do you actually need to transfer? And in most circumstances, you are looking at those severe events that have less frequency or less probability of happening. So doing some sort of event scenario mapping will help you determine what can be transferred. And you don't have to always buy insurance, right? There's other ways of doing loss financing, but this is why enterprise risk management or the idea of how do you finance a loss doesn't just sit with the security professional. It's a multidisciplinary game that you have to play with your finance folks, with your risk management folks.
Very cool. Well, listen, if you're joining us right now, I see a couple of people have joined back on. We've increased to about double of followers that are watching this. This is interesting. We're talking cyber insurance with Monica Tig. We're talking about the actual correlation between getting some level of cyber insurance support in the market and your maturity. So if you're watching right now, go ahead and repost on LinkedIn. Go ahead and tell people that you're interested, because I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. So in caveman or, kindergarten level terms, how does a cyber insurance offering get presented to an asset owner? Could you just give us that basic understanding, Monica, as we kind of dive deeper into the depth of cyber insurance?
Yeah. So in most cases, cyber insurance policies have evolved. So this is just a standardized answer, but you would get different answers depending on the questions that you pose. In today's environment, you would have first-party costs, so the costs that you incur as an organization when you deal with a cyber event. Those costs are forming the majority of the coverage from a cyber insurance policy perspective, especially for critical sectors that have business income exposures, so productivity, production exposures that you mentioned, Ted. So business interruption costs.
Sectors, the stuff critical sectors care about.
Yeah, business interruption, so availability type issues. And so that would cover also restoration costs in terms of getting back up and running to the same level that you were prior to an event. You certainly have what we call event management or incident response costs, which depending on the severity of the event could be beyond what you as an organization want to hold on your balance sheet. So if you think of what it costs you to deal with an average event, then that could be retained by you as an organization. So you don't have to use insurance for that. But if you can't anticipate how severe a cyber event can be and the amount of hours and expertise that you would need in order to investigate what happened and restore your systems, that's when insurance is very useful, and the policy does cover that. You do have this element of legal liability that is built into the insurance policy. So in most cases, if you don't really hold personal information, you would still have responsibility for your network security by contract with other third parties. And so you can look at your network security as a potential liability if you have been responsible for a breach that then has impacted others in the same industry as you. So let's say, supply chain risk is a good example of that, where you do have, and a lot of organizations rely upon their legal teams to have good contract management so that there is some limitation of liability. But in most cases, you would still have defense costs. You would still need those experts to investigate and determine what happened in a potential cyber event. If there was negligence involved, that's definitely not something that you want to hear about in the critical sectors, that there was negligence in respect of network security. And so in simple terms, your own costs and then costs that you owe to others.
So would it be, can you think about cyber insurance as a mechanism that is going to pull budget, or I don't want to use the word reward, but there are two buckets. You got your own internal costs. We're talking about production. We're talking about productivity. We're talking about non-productive time. And then your secondary is either legal costs, incident response costs, backup costs, things that you're going to be paying third parties for.
Yes. Yep. You can think of it that way. Okay. And then you also have the damages that you're causing to others.
Right. Okay. So that's more of a liability. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I watched your S4 presentation. It was awesome, by the way. What I love most about it was how fluid and cool you just talked the whole time with a very minimal usage of slides. Okay. A lot of people can't do that. But I love the idea. Just give us a little bit of a backstory of where cyber insurance came from. I think you had shared that it was like a marketing term when it was really this much longer name legally. Give the audience a little bit of an understanding of what you spoke about, please.
Yeah, well, it's a very complex problem to solve when you're in insurance and you want to look at emerging risks and you want to be able to offer products that are actually beneficial to organizations. You have to start somewhere. And the way that cyber insurance started was in the late 1990s. It was a concept from a internet security perspective that an AIGer, American International Group, which is a very famous insurance company in the States. Of course, it has global operations, but they were the first ones that really put cyber insurance on the map. And it wasn't about business interruption. It was all about privacy and security of the systems. It was about media liability. So a lot of companies were afraid of what content they were putting out on websites. So it had nothing to do with the complexities of operations nowadays. Fast forward, in 25 years or even more, the cyber insurance product is covering a lot of different losses or potential losses. And actually, this is why it's important that you, as an asset owner, represent your business model to internal folks to understand what the issues might be from a production perspective. That then can communicate those to brokers and to insurance companies, because insurance companies do need to customize those cyber policies to your own business model and how you want those losses to be covered. Otherwise, you're paying for overinsurance, as in you're paying too much premium for coverages that you do not actually need. And that's just a waste of money because you could use that to spend it on a cybersecurity control that you may not have budget for. And I know that that's sometimes the struggle is, do I spend my budget on cyber insurance or do I spend my budget on a cybersecurity control? But we can get back to that.
Well,
it's
it's a huge question. It's a huge question. And I've seen cyber insurance quotes range as not only an asset owner in a previous business, where I couldn't even get coverage to maximize or to satisfy what I thought was a loss, not because I didn't have a good cyber program, but because there just wasn't an offering on the market specific to my sector. Then you jump into me owning a tech company, there's a limit of how much cyber insurance that they'll cover. And where I find it really challenging is there is a limit to how much insurance a product company, a tech company, a service company can buy, right? Because I know I've been in the market. But what I also see is a little bit of a mismatch with what the actual, maybe the asset owner wants you to coverage in a third party, right? They'll say, hey man, I want $100 million or $50 million. Well, that product doesn't even exist in the market. And so I think it begs to the next question in our conversation here is the type of risks and threats that cyber insurance can mitigate. So let's dive into maybe the top 2 or 3 reasons somebody's going to buy it and what that program would look like. Do you find that people are buying more insurance to protect against a non-productive time incident or experience? Or are they buying cyber insurance to protect maybe the supply chain or some sort of liability downstream, maybe with their product or maybe with their service? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the motivations are different depending on who you speak to. So if we break down critical sectors into maybe ones that are not as affected by privacy, right? And then, so
Okay.
I would say energy, oil and gas,
Chemical.
manufacturing. Yeah.
There's
So
no PII. We're not dealing with,
outside of, let's say, healthcare and financial institutions, which is a completely different way of looking at the risk.
Right.
It is about the business interruption and the recovery time, because your earnings are directly correlated to that. The reputational impact is not something that is insurable per se in the industry. There are coverages that are deemed to be reputational harm or reputational value based, but what they really are is just covering the business interruption losses so that you're back up and running and you're having the same earnings as you did in the past. It doesn't cover you for a future loss of reputation, because coming up with that number or understanding what your loss of reputation is, it's almost a theoretical exercise, right? It's not something that has been based in fact, so it's hard to insure. But you can have different hedging mechanisms for that, so it's not insurance related. So business interruption, and then you have this idea that you can spend money that is not allocated for paying salaries, right? Like getting the business to operate as usual. You have this pot of money to respond to an event which is outside of your normal working cadence, right? There are retainers that are put in place to respond to an event, but the amount of money that it costs to deal and respond with a severe cyber attack has not really been contemplated fully, which is why even coming up with the limits that you need from a cyber insurance perspective should be based on events. And so that you can model and see how much is sort of the maximum that I think I need to budget for in a very bad situation. And that depends. Are you dealing with a ransomware event? Because that's very different than a business email compromise, and how you could potentially deal with that yourself and not necessarily use insurance for it. Yeah. But insurance is also,
Well, no, this is a difficult topic. And the example I was going to bring up is totally agree and think that for a chemical company, manufacturing company, a drilling company, a pipeline company, we're not dealing with the liability of the personnel, and not to discredit the value of safety, okay? But if we just think about the reliability, the profitability, and the operational uptime of these facilities, to me, that's the 90% answer on why cyber insurance. But let me offer to the audience my personal perspective, and then I want you to either push on it or agree with it. Why is it tougher to buy insurance? Why is it tougher to associate cyber controls of business outcomes in critical sectors? Here's my thoughts. Let's take a rig, for example. The rig is owned by one company, but it's contracted by an operator that is pushing pretty much how that rig is operating, where it's operating, the depths that it's running, and then there's a service company that's coming in to run casing or to drill. There's a web of responsibility and ownership for that critical operation. Take a look at maritime. The vessel is owned by one company. The goods that are on that vessel is owned by another company. The actual management of the vessel, who's actually driving the ship, that's another company. And then when they hook up to a port, that's another company. So who owns the real cybersecurity strategy, the controls, mitigation, and in turn, the insurance? Do you not agree that sectors outside of finance, sectors outside of healthcare, it's a little bit more challenging to kind of circle who's in charge and who will own the responsibility of various things. Do you see that as a challenge in the industry?
It is and it manifests itself when you're underwriting the risk, because you do have to understand who is ultimately responsible for the maintenance and implementation of the cybersecurity strategy. But whoever owns the ultimate profit should have a responsibility of how you bring all of these different supply chain stakeholders into your cybersecurity program.
So you're saying whoever owns the ending profit. So let's say you own a manufacturing facility,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm going to subcontract my goods to be built in your manufacturing facility. And as a result of that 5-year contract, I own the goods that are coming out. I own all the costs of going in. I should own the cyber insurance policy because I'm driving a standard to you, and I would own the policy?
So there would be different owners in the policies. That you need multiple policies basically to deal with that, because the policy protects for your own costs that you incur in solving a cyber attack. Mm-hmm. So if you have the ownership of the manufacturing facility, you should have your own cyber insurance policy that covers you for your business interruption losses. If you're subcontracting out for a service, right, like somebody else is manufacturing in your facility, then they need to have their own insurance policy as well, because they would be losing the profit for their own operations. But the whole infrastructure would not necessarily be managed by them. That's what I'm understanding from your example, right? It would also be under the purview of somebody else. So they would need the information of how that cybersecurity is being managed.
I mean, I would take it even a step further in a chemical facility. So let's say you have, within a chemical facility, you have these different zones. All these different zones are operating at a different, let's just say, pace, or a different P&L, or a different product that they're making. And it becomes really challenging. This is the real question I'm getting after, is who owns the responsibility for the cyber insurance policy? Is it because if the operational manager owns the facility and she wants to keep people safe, she wants to keep things running on time, she wants to maintain profitability, the CFO is the one, alongside the CEO and the board, is managing generally the risks that we're taking on. And there's multiple forms of insurance, whether it's, it just doesn't have to be cyber, right? Yeah. Then you've got the security leadership, who's actually responsible for introducing controls and mitigating the threats. I believe, and I'll make a statement here that's short, OT cybersecurity leaders are not thinking about cyber insurance that much. They're already overwhelmed. Should they be? Or should this be more of a facility manager's ownership? There's a policy that gets printed out and put on somebody's desk in critical sectors. What desk should that be, Monica?
Yeah, ownership of an insurance policy, the way I translate that means that you're responsible for coming up with the best structure for the insurance policy, what coverages it needs to have, how to pay or finance it, really, to pay for the premium. All that ownership does sit more so with either the risk management team that is part of a treasury function or a finance function, or a CFO. Now, the CISO is very much involved in being able to own what the security posture of that chemical manufacturing plant looks like. So he or she has to be able to work with the facility managers as well as the operations folks and OT security specialists to get that information and understand what sort of controls and resilience has been built into the manufacturing plants, to then figure out what risk do you actually want to transfer. The ownership, though, of the insurance policy does sit at a more, managerial level in the C-suite, because it does protect the enterprise value of that company. Now, an OT security professional should be thinking about insurance because you are providing transparency on what the risk really is day to day. You are putting in place controls, processes that will then directly impact the level of risk that you're transferring. So understanding what your insurance policy covers will actually give you clarity. Are we being protected, or are we reducing our loss experience from the things that we care about as OT risk professionals? Because the answer is probably no. You should call out insurance policies that do not cover you for what you actually expect at the time of law.
I totally agree. One of the things that I've said on this show is that as OT security and operational leaders, we have to tie our investment of cyber to some sort of business outcome. You know, decrease non-productive time, increase safety, increase output, maintain brand aware, brand or strategy. This is an important component of the OT security role that we have today, because unlike previous versions of security where we were just dealing with front end, data and personnel information, intellectual property in the form of what we can see on our computers, now we're dealing with actual moving parts within a plant. And I hate to say it, but I think that we're a long way from there. I think that a lot of OT cyber programs are still in their nascent stages. They're still breaking open seashells with rocks. And so there's a lot of products on the market that says, yeah, you need cyber insurance to cover that. But don't you believe that the output of a solidified cyber insurance offering that is communicated effectively across the asset owner organization requires input from all of these different groups, operations, security, finance? They all have to be aligned on what the risk is, which means they have to be aligned on what the threats are, what the business outcomes they're either trying to avoid are, and the controls that are going to protect or enable that. I mean, there is a laundry list of things that they have to do right before they are able to really have an insurance discussion. Yeah. And I think the majority of organizations aren't there yet. Do you agree?
They are not. However, some are, and insurance as a discussion point is sort of forcing people to have those interactions. And forcing sounds like a very aggressive way of doing it, but it's necessary to discuss it to then buy insurance. Do not ever be fooled by a short insurance transaction. Like if you're just applying a minimal amount of information and then you're getting your cyber insurance policy, what are the chances that that insurance company really understands your business model in the critical sector? It's just not, it's not right. You're supposed to provide a transparent view of your risk so that there is the same level of information for the insurance company as well as you. Of course, certain brokers will have different strategies. They'll say, don't tell them too much because that's going to increase your premiums. But actually, the reason why, the reason why it's important to be factual about what your controls are and your resilience is that that's the way you can manage your premium long term. The reason why cyber insurance is so volatile is that it's imperfect information that is being shared. I totally get it.
It's a circular equation that is rooted in controls that most people, let's just be honest, they don't always understand. It's a big challenge. So we had a comment here, and I think that the nature of the comment is, where do incentives fit within the cyber insurance world? And you just sort of bridged to that without even knowing that comment was going to pop up. And you said, this is the way I think cyber insurance works. Now tell me if I'm right or wrong here, is that you have the underwriters who are actually going to write the policy. They're the ones that are going to give you a price, and they're the ones that are going to eventually kind of pay out on the policy if it's activated. But in order to get that policy established, they go through what is called a broker. Now that broker's job is to go and assemble all the information, assess the organization, and then bring that back to not just one, but multiple underwriters. And correct me if I'm wrong, that cyber insurance rarely is its own standalone policy, and it usually can sit as a rider on top of another one. All of this brings an element of the telephone game, I think, which I have constantly spoken about. As we bring in more people within the risk chain, it becomes a little bit more dilutive. Is that how cyber insurance is introduced to an asset owner and eventually purchased? Is that the broker communicating the cyber state of maturity is communicated to a series of underwriters, and then prices are sent back to the asset owner, and eventually one is chosen and the broker executes that contract?
Yeah, the brokers are really managing the flow of communication, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing, right? The good reason why brokers should be needed is to understand the availability of coverages, understand how these insurance companies look at cyber risk, why or why not they will ask you certain questions. They're basically there to translate the insurance industry back to the asset owner. But what brokers shouldn't be doing is actually giving you the easiest way to place a cyber insurance policy. And you should be speaking to a broker that has cyber insurance knowledge and not just general insurance knowledge. There's a huge value in a broker understanding what your property policy does, what your general liability policy does.
Sure.
But you do need somebody that has spent time in cyber insurance products, because actually I would challenge you on what you said about it being a rider. Cyber insurance is not a rider. Okay. Cyber insurance is a standalone policy, because there have been issues with extending cyber insurance into other lines where the way that that contract is drafted does not take into consideration how cyber events happen and how those claims manifest. And then you're basically going, if it's too easy to place insurance, then the claim is going to be maybe harder to resolve. In some cases, I would say going and spending more time in placing the cyber insurance policy is a good indication that your claims and your losses are better covered or will behave better at the end of the day. So most of the bad coverage in the media around cyber insurance is certainly related to misconceptions about what a property policy covers and what a cyber insurance policy covers. There are reports that say that cyber insurance does not cover all your losses, but that's like digging into why did you buy the policy in the first place? What are the types of losses you expected to be covered?
Are we having, this is a loaded question for an expert in the industry, but I hear these claims that cyber insurance market is actually upside down. There's more insurance policies than we possibly could cover at once. And people are having an issue getting their policy activated for whatever reason. Sometimes they go back and say, well, you didn't have this control in place that you thought you would. Talk to us about activating the policy. We buy a policy, we'll get to how we get to a policy segment, but like just activating that policy, how is that going in the industry specifically for critical sectors? Is it easy to activate the, not activate the policy, but what happens when you call and you claim, like the claims itself? How's that going in critical sectors, and how can it improve?
Yeah, so in the majority of cases, if you're talking about energy, power, utility, and manufacturing, because again, outside of the healthcare and financial institution space, there isn't as much cyber insurance penetration because of the lack of awareness around what can insurance help with and how can I structure the insurance coverage to help me. So the activation rates or the rates of loss are pretty minimal in these sectors, except for manufacturing, which with a lot of ransomware activity and actually low standards in terms of cybersecurity in most cases on the IT side, and then the OT is slowly catching up. Manufacturing seems to be a powerhouse of claims. The way you access an insurance policy is firstly through an incident response hotline. So every insurance company, especially if you haven't requested that you use your own incident response team. So you can use your own incident response team. The insurance company just has to vet, quote unquote. So they just make sure that the incident response firm has experience in your sector, understands the complexities of what could happen in a cyber event. So they want to make sure that they deal with professionals. If you don't have an incident response firm on a retainer or have a preferred one, then in most cases you would call the insurance hotline. Now the insurer partners with professional incident response firms. Some insurance companies have internalized their own teams, but they wouldn't be the same as a true incident response team. They still work with third parties basically to respond. Yeah. And they have very reputable incident response firms, but the most important thing is to figure out how will you work with those incident response firms, which is why as an OT security professional, you do want to engage in the insurance conversation to know who is on that policy that I need to deal with if an event does happen. And once the incident response firm deals with it, then you will get your, or at the same time, you'll get your legal team internally to get involved to maintain some privilege.
Talk to me about just the timeline, because when we say that we are experiencing some sort of event and that event becomes an incident, and we have officially stated that we are at, incident response 001 alpha, we're testing it out. We're saying, hey, we're going to switch to these backups. We're going to move these people over here. We're going to switch offline here, here, and here. This is happening quickly. And operational and asset owner leadership, they make decisions in minutes and hours, right?
Yeah.
It almost seems, because everything that you've laid out on how the insurance policy is then called on, there's the need for a third party. There's need for some sort of analysis. How long does that generally take in the OT market? And is that affecting the payouts? Talk to me about just how long this takes. Does this take days or does this take months?
Well, the calling upon the incident response firms is really something you need to prepare for ahead of an event. So figuring out when you would like to provide notice is important, and you need to deal with your broker and the insurance company to figure out what they expect of you. In most cases, the policies say as soon as reasonably practical. So you need to be able to actually give notice when you're not in the midst of the actual incident.
Yeah, that language is, it's in the SEC rules. It's in a lot of different governance rules that are out there, which I think is fair.
Yeah.
And then once that kicks off, it's got its own timeline, right?
Yeah, the recovery of the business income loss can take a year because in most cases, organizations are not prepared to put together a proof of loss. So in most cases, asset owners do not have the formula of where do I get this number and that number and analyze my loss of productivity to be able to put together how much money am I claiming from my insurance company. So there are forensic accountants that come and help organizations with coming up with that number, and that can take months. The insurance policies allow you to come up with a proof of loss even 6 months after the event. So it gives you enough time to have the right numbers, and then you have a negotiation process, because in most cases, organizations try to recover more perhaps than is expected under the policy, and you have a little bit of a negotiation.
Yeah, so we've got a question, and I'll allow the folks to read it and you as well while I make a comment. I love what you just said about how most organizations lack the planning, the fidelity, the team, the capability of really enumerating and evaluating what was their loss. I think that should happen way earlier in the process before they ever buy insurance, because if they do that effectively, I think the coverage is going to match the potential outages, and then it becomes an easy process. I would even take it a step further and say, look, if you are going to go ask for $1 million in budget, asset owner, you need to tie in the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve or the business outcomes you're trying to avoid, and you need to enumerate those in dollar amounts. And then you need to kick it back and say, what are the controls that I need to invest in to reduce the likelihood of that? That is not really, I think we get caught up on risk. I don't think it's a risk discussion. I think it's an actual, this is the outage, and here are all the things that we need to do to reduce that. It seems, in my opinion, and I wish it was otherwise, I think that the world of OT and critical sector securities are not doing that. I think they just say, I need some flashy stuff. I need some tech. I need to plug it all in. I need to make sure that I'm secure. But they don't go that extra mile to actually say, how is this $1 million investment or this $200,000 investment or this $80,000 contract actually tying in to my business outcome? And I think we have to do that better as an industry, Monica. And a positive secondary outcome is that we could buy insurance that fits.
Also, that exact information is what you would need to explain to an insurance company why you've chosen the controls you've chosen. Because the
so you got to do it anyway.
Yeah, just filling out a questionnaire saying I have all of these things doesn't really explain to an insurance company why you've chosen those controls to reduce your risk in your particular sector. Underwriters are not experts in all sectors, which is why you need to choose your insurance companies that ask you the right questions because they understand the risk. And in the future, underwriters will mature around their understanding of each particular sector, but it's the asset owners or the OT security professionals and IT security professionals that need to describe how the business actually operates and why those controls were chosen. Of course.
We are talking about, we're not talking about a unicorn. We're talking about a pink unicorn with blue glitters. I mean, I have worked with the top blue chip chemical, oil and gas pipeline companies out there. And there is such a dichotomy between what one company will do from a maturity perspective and the other. And I'll tell you where it comes down to. It comes down to alignment between the security folks and the operational folks. This idea of IT, OT convergence or divergence, I think, is really a distraction. I think that if the security leadership is tied in with the operational folks, tied in with the safety folks, tied in with the automation folks, tied in with physical security, and they're all sitting in a room, then the outcome of that collaboration is, what are we really trying to achieve? What are we trying to avoid? And I don't think that conversation is happening, which is why when we first spoke, Monica, I was like, how do we get cyber insurance in the critical sectors kind of rolling to where it's a more sustainable, it's something that we can buy easily. We can quote it easily. It seems like all of the responsibility lies not on the brokers, not on the cyber insurance sector itself, but actually on the asset owners driving that alignment so they can give clear guidance to the insurance that says, hey, here are the 6 different things that we're trying to avoid. We've been able to map out, there's a dollar amount for each one. And we'd like you to see what kind of coverage we can get. Oh, by the way, here's some third-party attestations of all of our controls illuminating our overall security program. And here's what we're going to be doing for the next 24 months. If that's delivered to an insurance broker, would they not have an easier time getting a little bit more streamlined process out to the asset owner to choose a policy?
Yes, they would also be better informed on what coverages they need to negotiate if everybody can voice their concerns about what losses we actually want covered, and this is why we want those losses covered, because we've done the homework and we've seen which items matter the most to us. It is concerning not to see OT security professionals on cyber underwriting calls. So a lot of the times you do get just questionnaires and maybe a few quotes, but for blue chip companies, you have an underwriting call where the organization needs to present the risk posture and underwriters ask questions. And there aren't many OT security representatives on those calls when you're talking about critical sectors.
I'm glad you said that, because I mean, it dovetails into the next topic, which is what's the landscape of insurance in our critical sector. So if you're just now joining us, we continue to have more people dive in. So whatever you're talking about, this topic is really hot, and I'm very excited. This, we're not talking about finance. We're not talking about healthcare. I would even say even retail is considered one of the top 16 critical sectors. We're not talking about them either. Those are pretty easy to match. How many credit card receipts, how many healthcare files, how many financial files, right? You're saying that there aren't enough OT leaders inside of the conversation about cyber insurance for manufacturing, for chemical, for wastewater, for utilities. That's correct, right, Monica?
Yes. That is.
And why do those OT people need to be in the room? Why do you think they're going to add value to the cyber insurance coverage discussion?
Well, you are presenting how the business operates from a process and operation standpoint. Also, the cybersecurity controls and therefore risk is different on the OT side versus IT. And most of the severity of the losses in manufacturing have come from the misunderstanding of how IT security impacts OT and vice versa. Also, the types of coverages that you want as an OT security professional may be different than an IT security professional, because you have to look at different ways of recovering, different ways of doing incident response, your priorities.
Different responsibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, different responsibilities, totally. I mean, we're thinking about data management. We're thinking about, front end systems uptime versus facility downtime and safety. I think that they are different. We have a couple questions that I think dovetail into this really effectively. So, Himanshu mentioned, how can we quantify the financial impact of an OT cyber risk? How do we calculate the business impact of an OT incident? Specifically, how do we quantify it? That's what we're talking about. I'll take a shot at it. I think quantifying the financial impact of an OT cyber risk is very hard. How do you quantify how much you love your spouse? Well, I think you can quantify, I think risk is a really loaded word that we overuse in the industry. Correct me or challenge me, Monica. We should just be thinking about the financial impact of a business outcome that we are either trying to maintain or we are trying to avoid. So to answer this gentleman's question, it would be, regardless of the risk, regardless of the threats, regardless of the controls that were compromised, regardless of whether it was insider threat or if it was a nation state actor, none of that really matters. What does matter is that we had an outcome that resulted in 48 hours of that production facility that was offline. And because we did our math on the output of that facility, it cost us Y amount of dollars over a given period of time. And that's what you are underwriting, correct?
Yeah, and you want to know what directly impacts that outcome. If it's easy to map out that something's particularly related to OT, which in some cases there are instances of something particularly happening in the OT environment that affects the business outcome. And a simple one would be voluntarily shutting down your OT because you had an IT incident. You could be triggering a business income loss because of that, because you're taking a preventative measure. And that could potentially be covered under your insurance policy because you're effectively
just to
mitigating.
Pause right there. If we decide that one of our mitigation techniques to reduce the impact of an IT outage or an IT cyber attack is to actually take our OT systems offline, we can actually cover that. And that insurance is not a productivity insurance. That's an actual cyber insurance line item.
Yeah, it's cyber insurance business interruption, which is a coverage that falls under cyber insurance. And the reason why underwriters would be comfortable to cover that is you are doing it in order to minimize the amount of business income loss you could have because you know how to investigate and come back up as a business from voluntarily shutting down or islanding, a specific site. If you had just left it and you didn't mitigate it, the amount of business interruption would be potentially greater than voluntarily shutting it down.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. Very cool. So let's move to another slide as we're coming up on time. Challenges in the critical sector. That's what we're talking about right now. What do you see? We've been talking about that. Not enough OT people in the room. How do you quantify OT risk? There's a couple comments I'll get to in a second on that. What are the real challenges you see? If you could look 10 years in the future and the cyber insurance market is a really valuable, well-oiled, functioning machine that supports asset owners, what needs to happen today, Monica?
Well, we need to be able to build a better understanding of how OT security impacts business outcomes. So being part of that conversation, understanding how IT, OT impact business outcomes and translating those outcomes into the insurance market, not just by filling out questionnaires, but being present in those conversations is going to educate the insurance industry on what you care about as an OT security professional and what your organization cares about as a business outcome. That way, the coverages will be aligned to what you need. Yes, there are certain, and I see a comment from David, there are certain insurers that are better positioned because they've hired talent in their organizations to understand OT cyber risk, but that's not going to happen across the board because there aren't enough OT specialists to go around for the organizations that probably need them more than just insurance.
The whole show is about that. There's not enough people in the industry, but you bring up a great point. It's like, there's this brain drain. So you got cyber insurance players, you got the big four, you have all these different players that are pulling cyber talent. We don't have enough of them out there. I wanted to cover one particular topic. Somebody had said that they want to challenge me on whether or not you can come up with costs of cyber risk using some different frameworks. Dwayne, how you doing? Been a while. I invite anybody that wants to come onto the show to explain how to use these frameworks to actually calculate the cyber risk. And I look forward to anybody that wants to come on using whatever methodology or framework that's out there. I will fight it all day long on how challenging it is. And I think the outcome that we would happily agree on in high five is that every single asset owner is different. And so I've seen a lot of tech companies, Monica, I'd love your comment on this, tell me that they have the magic blue pill, that if you just use this one product or you just install this one solution, that we're going to be able to dictate the financial impact really easily. And I am all for it. I mean, I'm a capitalist by nature. I'm an entrepreneur by nature. I love the idea of this magic pill, but I am not convinced that critical sectors can deploy anything, whether it's from NIST or whether it's from NIS or whether it's from ICIC, whether it's from FAIR, that is the easy button. I actually think that it relies so much on alignment between operational people, your risk people, your supply chain people, your security people. That's where the breakdown is. And if you have great alignment there, then yeah, you could probably calculate these. Your thoughts, Monica?
Yeah, I do think some of these frameworks give you the base to have those conversations. So it translates the language that everybody should be using to come up with the costs. So FAIR, as an example, I think it's a methodology that has helped organizations bring those stakeholders into the mix and have discussions about what do we think the potential business outcomes can be. And it is important that everybody realizes that FAIR is not actually well known in the insurance industry. So that is also an educational piece because it hasn't been maybe adopted. And as an example, it could be anything, but because these frameworks haven't been adopted at scale from a client's perspective, the insurance companies have not necessarily been able to measure exposure based on them either. So this probably does need to align at some point because even coming up with materiality from an SEC guidelines perspective, these conversations have to happen before the event occurs to understand how are you going to quantify the materiality of an event. And some frameworks do help with that understanding, but it will be more complicated in critical sectors. I don't believe in silver bullets. It's just not really how reality works.
Well, I think that we've deployed massive amount of capital into the OT cybersecurity space, and we have done a really good job avoiding kinetic attacks. I think there's tons of people that use marketing to say how important it is to secure yourself. But I think we have kind of hit a ceiling on how many products a given OT cyber team can deploy, how many they can configure, how many they can manage. And part of it is because budgets are not endless. Part of it is because we don't have enough people. But part of it is because the events are just not happening at the rate that I think we had assumed that they would. That shouldn't be a bad thing. Regardless, I think cyber insurance is an extremely valuable, important offering, product, capability, risk reduction mechanism. And I appreciate what you're doing in the industry to help people. And I want to put a loud piece on that to say, how do we get more people involved? And so, we're at time, but I wanted to give you the last couple moments to communicate to the team here now and over the course of the next couple of years. What can people do better to support this industry?
Well, I just want to pick up on what you just said, and maybe that is the best final thought, is that companies have not seen events happen. They haven't seen the losses or the business outcomes materialize. That's what the thought process was in the early 2000s. Let's say 2005, 2006, nobody was buying cyber insurance because no events had happened, no losses had manifested. It was a waste of money. But the complexity of how cybersecurity and technology will become number one dependency of every sector, of course, critical sectors as well, means that at some point these events and losses will materialize. And that's not where you want to start on your insurance journey. You want to be able to understand how you're managing your risk by business outcome and then have the conversations on cyber insurance now before the losses are material. And then you have to do the things that the insurance company asked you to do to become a good risk. And for critical sectors, that's just a scary thought that an insurance company has to ask you to implement the right controls, considering that it's people's lives at stake and also the reliance that we all have on these critical sectors to live our lives, right? So it's the reason why I'm involved in this is because insurance companies need more help understanding critical sector cyber risks, and I think asset owners need a bridge into insurance that is not just your friendly lawyer that comes around to ask you what are you claiming for.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here on the Business Cyber Show. Monica has graced us with her presence on from stage to stage across the globe talking about cyber insurance. It's this new, relatively new offering in the market. And what she's saying is critical sectors need to help the insurance providers and the brokers do a better job of quoting, do a better job at outlining what these financial outcomes that we're trying to avoid are. And I couldn't be in more agreement. I think it is a call for the cybersecurity critical sectors to do more. So thank you, Monica, for your time. This will be one of our better shows that we've had over the course of the past couple of months. We've tripled our actual viewer count online, which means that people that were watching it sent it to others to watch. So thanks for the awesome collaboration. Thank you for teaching us. We wish you the best of luck out there. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ted.
My pleasure. Join us next week. We're going to be talking at the same time, 10 a.m. Central Time, here on the Business of Cyber series. I'm going to be bringing in an OT leader from the actual rig world who is out there on rigs with a hard hat, steel toes, working with operational teams, working with their service providers, and working with their ETs to really understand what's happening at the actual shop floor, at the actual on the drilling rig, and is going to deploy some of that knowledge back to us on how do you lead OT cyber teams in extremely decentralized environments. I'm your host, Ted, and I appreciate you staying with us on the show. Have a wonderful day. Talk to you next week. End stream.